Hey everyone. Today I'm doing some reviews of four Western novels that I read fairly recently. Louis L'Amour, Zane Grey, Max Brand, and Marshall Grover. So, pretty big names. Now, my experience with the Western genre is fairly limited. I'd never read any Western novels before this, and maybe I've seen probably about 10 or 12 Western movies. So I'm coming to this maybe without kind of the same critical eye as some people. But yeah, I was just excited to try out something new. The first book I read was Louis L'Amour, The Burning Hills. This book is from 1956, and I have a 1975 Corgi. Now, when I was coming to reading Western novels, I was really hoping to select something first that would be very much of its genre, wanting, shootouts, bar fights, tough lawmen, bandits, cattle rustlers, all that sort of stuff. The things that we associate with the Western genre. So I'm pretty glad that I picked this one because it really did typify the genre. To go over the plot a little bit, it's basically like a revenge story. Our main character, Trace Jordan, has had his horses stolen and his business partner murdered, and he's after the gang that did that, right? So this is the Sutton gang. He ends up killing their kind of patriarch leader, and then the rest of the Sutton gang is now after Trace Jordan. So it's kind of a back and forth. Sometimes Trace is very much on the back foot. Sometimes he gets one over on them as they're kind of chasing each other through the desert. We also have this character of Maria Christina, another person who hates the Sutton gang. And because she also hates this gang, she helps out Trace Jordan. Sometimes it's Maria saving Trace, and sometimes it's the other way around. Trace is helping her out and saving her. So now we're getting into kind of my main criticism of this book, which is that the relationship between Maria and Trace is a little bit off putting. Trace often comes off as very misogynistic and patronizing towards Maria. I understand that this is a book from the 1950s and there's going to be sort of outdated, I mean, the whole genre really, there's going to be certain outdated things in it. But even for 1950, this seemed pretty strong. It also didn't work because Maria, for the most part, is shown to be a strong character, an independent woman, and then sort of at certain parts of the book, all that kind of just falls away, right? Like the character of Maria doesn't seem consistent. So even for like 1950 standards, I don't think this was well handled. I don't think I'd be the only one pointing this out. I watched the movie of this, and they toned down that aspect of Trace's character a lot. So clearly, the scriptwriter thought that they should probably tone that down a bit and not make him such an ass. Other than that main complaint, this was a good book, and I really quite enjoyed it. I'll definitely be reading more by Louis L'Amour. I think Louis L'Amour has some excellent prose. I really liked all his descriptions of the desert and so on. Yeah, it was well done. All right, moving on to Captives of the Desert by Zane Grey. This book was first published in 1925, and apparently, I mean, just according to some websites I read, um, this story originated as a rough draft by Zane Grey's secretary at the time, Millicent Smith. And then Zane Grey came in and kind of like expanded it and polished it and so on. So, really, we should say the book is by Zane Grey and Millicent Smith. So I was just talking about the Louis L'Amour book and how I was kind of glad that it was very typical of its genre. So this Zane Grey book, not so much. It was essentially just a love story that had some Western elements to it. Um, so a lot of this is really just a melodramatic love story type thing, but then there's sections of the book where it'll be cowboy adventure kind of things. It kind of just goes back and forth like that. One of the other atypical things about this book is that it's not set in the usual time frame that we would think of as like the Western era. It's set in the 1920s, so pretty much when the book was written, right? Same era. So the basic of the plot is there's a romance between the two main characters, John Curry and Mary Newton. Mary Newton is stuck in a failing marriage to Wilbur Newton. And the idea is Wilbur's kind of this lazy, mean kind of guy. So a lot of the tension of the story is knowing that Mary is, even though there's no real love between these two characters, Wilbur and Mary, Mary is staying loyal to Wilbur. And of course, in this era, like a divorce would be much tougher to get. Some of the book is even about, would she have grounds for a divorce yet? So as the book progresses, it turns out that Wilbur is smuggling alcohol into Native American reservations. So this is where most of the action in the story comes in that we've got characters investigating what Wilbur's up to. The novel has a strong start, and I could kind of tell that Zane Grey's prose was quite good. But unfortunately, as the book goes on, there's some real lulls in the action. One of the big problems is that Wilbur, who's the oafish husband, he's just kind of absent for long stretches in the book. So there's no real tension in those sections. So whenever Wilbur's around, there's obviously tension, the marriage tension between Wilbur and Mary, and there's also tension between Wilbur and John. And then in the middle part of the novel, when Wilbur's away, just kind of doing bad things, we're told, but he's not really around to provide any sort of forward momentum to the story. And that didn't have to be the case, right? If you were planning out this story maybe to improve it, you would think, well, we could follow what Wilbur's doing exactly. We could see the operations of his alcohol smuggling, or how is he making the alcohol? How is he transporting it? Who's he selling it to? All that sort of stuff, which would have been interesting. That's just kind of not in the novel at all. The novel also doesn't really make full use of its 1920s setting. At the start of the novel, there's quite a lot of interesting stuff about this new technology of the automobile. So there's comments on, people who are used to riding horses are now taking this fancy new car. And they kind of talk about how, it's good in some ways, but it can't handle the same rough terrain that a horse could handle, for example. Those sorts of observations are interesting, but they don't really affect the story in any way. And kind of as the novel goes on, those sorts of observations don't really matter to the main storyline. And really, you could question why did these two writers decide to set this in 1920 in the first place, um, because you could have just as easily made it 1860. So kind of a middling one there. Not bad, but not great. The next book I read was In the Hills of Monterey by Max Brand. This book was written in 1924. And just like that Zane Grey one, which was set in 1920, this one's also set in an era that you wouldn't really think of as Western as such. But this is way earlier. This is 1820. So, yeah, not really the Wild West as we think of it. This is when the Spanish had control of California. There's more of a focus on sword fighting, swashbuckling kind of adventure in this one. I've never read or watched Zorro, but this is kind of what I imagine it's like. So, kind of the setup of the plot in this one, the idea is that there's three guys who are all arriving in California at the same time on the same boat. So, our main characters are Louis Mortier, Francisco Valdez, and El Royo. And our protagonist, El Royo, is Valdez's slave. So right at the start of the story, El Royo escapes from Valdez, and the rest of the book is kind of about El Royo's adventures and can he get revenge on this Valdez guy who made him into a slave. And all three of the men kind of get caught up in local intrigue, trying to get some of the land in California, trying to win the heart of a local landowner's like a daughter. And there's a lot of convoluted twists and turns, and it's really like pulpy, fast-paced stuff. At first, that pace was really refreshing to me. After kind of the lulls and some of the slowness of this book, when I first picked up Max Brand, I was like, good, finally, like things are picking up. But very quickly, it became a little bit exhausting, and too much of it felt like inconsequential and like too breezy, basically. But the book never really settles down. You don't get the best, you never really get to know the characters very well. It's all a bit too fast paced and meaningless, and nothing had any impact. Not even kind of when you're at the climactic parts of the book, you kind of always just feel like, oh, is that it? Right? Like it's so fast paced that there's nothing really there. In both the Zane Grey and the Louis L'Amour books, so the two previous books, I always get a sense that they have a deep appreciation of the land, of the natural world, of the desert. It all makes the landscape kind of a character of its own, right? That's not the case in this Max Brand book. You always get the sense that Max Brand's interested in dialogue and action, and that's it. So you always get the feeling that with this Max Brand book, it could have been set in Spain, it could have been set in, like, you could just change a few things around and it could be medieval Europe. It could have been like, Robin Hood. So yeah, another one, overall kind of middling. It was okay, but yeah, not great. Okay, last one. Marshall Grover, Drift, which is a Larry and Stretch book. This story is from 1956, and I've got a Cleveland edition from 1982. Marshall Grover is an Australian author, so I was kind of particularly interested to check him out to see, if there was any differences, if it was obvious that the man was not American. So basically, the characters of Larry and Stretch is that they're two itinerant workers who kind of They drift from town to town, getting into various kinds of trouble and adventure. At the start of Drift, they're in a jail because they've had a bar fight, and the local lawmen get them out of jail on the condition that they then escort a valuable witness from one town to another town. So this witness needs to testify against a leader of a local gang, the Sharky Gang, and because she's going to testify against Kurt Sharkey, the leader of the gang, the rest of the Sharky Gang is trying to kill her, and the gang also has like plans to disrupt the trial and maybe try to set free Kurt Sharkey. So the whole book is Larry and Stretch protecting the witness, coming up with clever ways to hide her or to attack the Sharky Gang. And the entire time you know that the book is building to the climactic trial, right? And will this guy be found guilty, or will there be an assault on the courtroom by the Sharky Gang? How does it all come to a head? In addition to being very much of its genre, very much like a Western, this also felt to me quite a bit like a buddy cop movie, right? Because it's Larry and Stretch who are kind of always joking around with each other and getting in trouble with the local lawmen and that sort of stuff. But they're basically good-hearted, right? All right, yeah, this one was good as well. Quite enjoyed this one. So if I had to rank them, let's think. I would say this is the worst one. Um, I will check out more Max Brand at some point, but yeah, I don't know how many chances I'm going to give him because this one did not impress me. This one was the second worst. I say worst, but really they're just kind of middling. Both of them were okay, but didn't really do too much for me. Zane Grey, at least I can tell, is a better writer. So if I check out Zane Grey again, I'll just have to make sure that it's supposed to be one of his better novels. This one was good. So now we're getting into the actual quite good novels, and for sure I'll be checking out more Marshall Grover. And the best out of those four was this one, Louis L'Amour, The Burning Hills. Yeah, this is great. We'll definitely be checking out more Louis L'Amour too. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. See you later.